Happy Monday. My name is Joe Farr, and welcome to our talk about how to pick the right business school. And I will be answering questions throughout, so please feel free to post your questions, and I'll just take time out from time to time to look at your questions and answer accordingly. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can show you my slideshow so we can get started. And so again, this is how to pick the right business school. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself before we get fully into the presentation. I earned my BA in economics from Duke University with a minor in chemistry. And while I was there, I was lucky all 4 years to be a manager for the men's basketball team. So I am still getting used to the idea that Coach K is retiring at the end of next season. After I graduated from Duke, I interned at the Atlantic Coast Conference, which is the league that Duke and University of North Carolina and NC State and a bunch of other schools play in collegiately. And that opportunity led me to work at ESPN programming for 4 years, where I got a great set of experiences in the sports and entertainment and television businesses. And that opportunity kind of led me to my long-term path where I wanted to start my own production company and develop my own ideas. And so I decided to get my MBA in marketing and leadership at the Yale School of Management. And during my second year, I was an admissions interviewer and student ambassador. And so that's where I got a little bit of insight into how admissions committees choose among all of the applicants for the student body. And I spun that experience out into admissions consulting with Veritas Prep. I say it's been over 10 years, but it's starting to inch toward 15 years. And I also founded Trey Mojo Productions, my production company, after I graduated from SOM. And one quick plug, and this website is pinned to the top of the chat so that you have access to it. But at Veritas Prep, we have free MBA admissions phone consultations where you can get a free profile evaluation and weigh your options if you are interested in getting a little bit of help in putting together your applications, or even if after this presentation you have some more questions about picking the right school for you, you can go to this site and get more info. And so there are 5 main things that you should do in order to pick your business school, and the rest of this presentation will follow these 5 points. So first, you want to self-evaluate your profile. Second, you want to determine career goals and skill needs. Third, you want to figure out what experience you want from this 2-year MBA experience. 4, you want to do deep research into your potential schools. And finally, number 5, finalize your school list. And so we'll tackle number 1, self-evaluate your profile. And again, feel free to post questions throughout. And if a question that you pose is something we'll get to, I'll let you know that it's coming in a few slides. But feel free to post as needed. And so when we talk about self-evaluating your profile, you want to honestly assess and scrutinize your profile strengths and weaknesses. So that means to compare average and median scores to determine your competitiveness. And So this is looking at the websites of all of the schools that you may have. It may be a long list of schools before you actually have started to whittle it down. You'll look at their class profiles so that you can see what their average and median scores are for GMAT and GPA. And if you are someone who's coming in with a low undergraduate GPA, you want to consider whether or not you have a strong enough GMAT score to compensate, or vice versa. And if you haven't taken your GMAT or GRE or EA yet, you can at least get an idea of the kinds of scores that you're shooting for, potentially based off of the list of schools you're looking at so far. You also want to look at whether or not you have a quantitative background and or exposure to traditional MBA concepts. And that doesn't mean that if you come from a liberal arts background like an English major who hasn't worked in a quantitative field, that doesn't mean that you're out of the running. In fact, a lot of students with that kind of profile still get into a top school, but understanding what your background is vis-a-vis other potential applicants can help you match yourself to the right school for you. You also want to look at whether or not you are active in the community and extracurricular activities. And do you have professional or personal global experience? A lot of schools are putting more and more emphasis on having a global experience now. So if you're someone who's lacking that, that can help you to also pick schools. And some programs help to compensate for the fact that you don't have global experience. So that's another aspect to help you decide. And if you have any weaker parts to your profile, do you have the ability to improve them? So if you think that you are at your top ceiling for GMAT, GRE, or EA scores, that may guide you towards certain schools, as opposed to if you have room to improve and you're going to take the time to study and get those scores up, that opens up the door to other potential schools. And if you have a low GPA, do you have the time to take some sort of coursework or some other kind of way to mitigate that lower GPA? And so as I've hinted at, all of these points will affect what tier of school you'll be applying to. Are you looking for, top 15 or maybe a tier 2 based on your overall profile? And so number 2 is to determine career goals and skill needs for those goals. Now, I know that a lot of you will be looking to use business school as an opportunity to figure out what your career goals are. And that is great. That's perfectly fine. But you do need to go into the application process with at least some idea of what you want to do in the short term, which means immediately after you graduate, or the long term, 5 to 10 years after graduation, because this helps to set in motion what schools are the best fit for you. And short-term goals can provide skills to reach your long-term goals. But if you don't know what it is you're working towards, you can't know what schools are right for you. And you also want to make sure that you do not craft the career goals you think the admissions committee wants to hear. Your goals should be what you truly want, at least at this point in time. Of course, once you get to school, the experiences you have in school may change some of these, but at least right now, what are these goals? And so you want to look introspectively and determine what is fulfilling for you and conduct research into this career path so that you can understand the industry and what is needed to reach the particular goals you have. And so that's another way to understand which schools are the right match, because if you want to do something more finance-based, then there are certain schools that are stronger in that field and have better job placement in finance versus marketing or consulting or any other field. You'll end up getting different schools out of those lists. And in terms of career path, so this kind of connects back to when we talked about self-evaluating your profile. You want to look back at your path up to this point, because that's also going to connect to what's missing between what you've had, what experiences you've had so far, and what you need to be able to get to your short and long-term goals. And so you want to understand that on average, admitted students have about 4 to 5 years work experience. And the average and median ages tend to be about 27, 28 for matriculation, though both older and younger applicants are admitted. And so if you're on the younger side, that's going to steer you more towards your maybe SOM Silver Scholar path if you are just getting ready to graduate, or the HBS 2+2 program, or those sorts of things. If you're an older applicant, there are other programs. They're a little more amenable than most. And so understanding where your profile sits there will be helpful. AdComs also look for applicants who have been promoted throughout their careers and have increased responsibility. And so understanding just how much of a career trajectory you've had will help lead you to which programs are more suitable. And understand that leadership is coveted. This could be serving as a formal manager of staff, but that's not the only form of leadership that takes place. You can also look at projects you have led or times you influenced senior management. And we talked about lower GPA before, but a lower GPA can also be and needs to be mitigated by great work experience. So whenever you have a lower maybe test score or lower GPA, work experience balances that out. If you're on the younger side, then you need to have stellar scores in order to fully mitigate any concerns. And I'm seeing that no one has any questions yet, but again, feel free to ask questions throughout if you need. And so now we're going to talk about skill needs and the path to attain them. If you only have 1 to 2 years of work experience, you want to consider whether gaining another year or two where you receive promotions and or additional responsibilities makes sense for you. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that can connect to your school choices in a couple slides or so. But definitely consider whether or not it's really time for you to go, or if it makes more sense to get a little more experience. And if you are closer to the median work experience, that 4 to 5 year experience, consider what skills you're lacking for your intended career path. And so again, this requires you to have a well-defined and attainable post-MBA career goal. And there are often skills and experiences needed before you get to the MBA to make your goals reachable. So you need to determine what those are. Like if you want to go into management consulting, what are the pre-MBA things that you need to be able to get there? And if you don't have them, then you need to find a way to get them so that the admissions committees then see that you are actually on the right path and that they can fit in to getting you to your goals. And that will also help you to figure out the best fit. Again, all of this is about fit, whether it's cultural or academic fit. So if you have certain skill sets, then that opens the door for a certain set of schools. If you're lacking certain skills, then maybe another set of MBA programs will be the ones to help you fill in these gaps. And you also want to volunteer for additional responsibilities within your organization so that you can fill any gaps that may be apparent on your resume due to maybe lack of promotion. A lot of times in a large organization, there's not room to be promoted, but there's room to get extra work and extra experiences. And if you thrive, that can actually lead to a formal promotion which then again opens the door for maybe some of the higher tier programs. And take coursework in your intended field if your job won't give you all the skills you need. So now we're going to talk about figuring out what experience you want. And so this isn't so much about the hard skills for your career goals. We're talking about what do you want your 2 years in graduate school to look and feel like? Or if you choose one of those 1-year MBA programs, what do you want to get from that school? And so one of the first questions you can ask yourself is which is more important? Networking opportunities, educational focus, career placement, and so on. Obviously, MBA programs are going to have a mix of all of these different elements, but different schools emphasize different aspects. Some schools are focused more on the networking, others focus more on the academics. You have schools that are most of the top schools are going to be great with job placement, but some of them put much more focus on that than others. So which program or which aspect speaks more to you? The other thing you want to consider is if you are looking for top 10 school only, or would you be open to applying to maybe a top 50 school instead, or maybe something even lower? Because really, if you think about it, there's a long list of fantastic schools with a great educational aspect. And not all of them have the same global reach, the same brand, the same ability to get you placed in certain jobs, and certain careers focus a little bit more on ranking than others. So understanding what you're looking for can help you to land on exactly what tier school you're applying to. And so obviously, again, you need to know your career goals and how important the brand name is to you. And you also want to understand, do you want a large school experience, or do you want a smaller, more intimate experience? And is the connection to the greater university important, or do you prefer to be a bit separate from the rest of the school? Like SOM, where I graduated, we're definitely fully integrated. We take part in and take advantage of all of Yale and what it has to offer, which is one of its selling points for SOM. But other schools might focus just on the business school brand and all of the advantages that the MBA program itself brings. And so what are you trying to get in that regard? And are potential extracurricular activities important to you? All of the schools are going to have extracurricular activities, but again, some schools put more emphasis than others and have more resources for extracurricular activities than others. So how much do you want to immerse yourself in the wider community outside of the classroom? And determine how important geography is for you. Obviously, your top 10, top 20, maybe even top 30 programs will have national or even global reaches, depending on how strong of a brand they have. But they still, even those schools, will have some regional strengths. And lower tiered programs will definitely be more regional. And so where do you want to be? And is there, this may sound silly, but it is important to many, if not most, the weather, the climate, what kind of culture the city or location brings. All of these things are aspects that you need to make sure you have an understanding of before you start whittling your school list down. If you don't, you can end up in a great school that's wrong for you. So make sure you are really thinking about what it is you want to get out of it. In fact, I'll tell you, when I was going through the application process, one of my favorite interviews, even though I didn't actually attend, was at University of North Carolina, Keenan Flagler School of Business. And the interviewer was a staff member, admissions committee staff member. And he said to me, he was talking about how rigorous an MBA program is. He said that for 2 years, these people are going to be doing things to you that you're not going to like. Again, talking about how much work and how rigorous it is. So you want to make sure that you like the people who are doing this to you. So you have to really fully understand the culture and what it is you're trying to get out of this. And part of that is understanding why you even want an MBA. MBA admissions committees are not looking for people who are just compiling advanced degrees. While the 2 years of business school can be used to determine what you want to do post-MBA, you need a clear plan going in. So consider, are you looking to switch careers? Because some programs are more suited for people switching than others. And you need the degree to move up within your current career? And do you have some big idea, like an entrepreneurial concept, that only the MBA can help you enact? Because you've got programs that are more entrepreneurial in nature than others, and some that are more suited to your traditional career paths. So you really want to think about what it is you want from the degree, and that'll help you to figure out what you want from the school. And you also want to consider why now is the right time for the MBA. Applying for an MBA should be a timely decision. You need it now, or if you're looking for maybe a year or two from now, you need it at that time, and it can't wait. And so you should be able to articulate why that is. It should not just be that you hate your current job and that you want to get out of it as soon as possible. And so again, this connects back to building your career goals. Do you have the skills needed to be successful with your goals? If yes, determine the best timeline to be able to reach them. If no, determine what is needed in addition to your MBA so that you can build a plan to learn those skills. If you are a younger than average applicant, you will need to explain why you think you don't need more experience. And if you do go through the process and end up getting rejected, this lack of experience could be the reason why. And I'm just looking. I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but Surab is asking, am I too young to apply for MBA program with 2 years of work experience? You are not necessarily too young. It really depends on what experiences you've gained in those 2 years, what kind of promotional path you've had. Because if you're somebody who has been promoted quicker than most, that can help overcome your youth. If you have certain experiences in your undergraduate degree, especially if you have MBA, some exposure to MBA type courses, that can help mitigate youth. If you have a great GPA, great GMAT, that helps mitigate. And again, you want to also look at, there are certain programs that are a little more suited than others to younger applicants, particularly like an SOM. You wouldn't be eligible for Silver Scholars or the HBS 2+2, but those are two programs that are a bit more amenable to younger applicants. So it really depends on the totality of the application that you can put together and what your strengths and weaknesses are. But 2 years does not take you out of the running. And Pooja asks, how's Foster Business School? So Foster is a fantastic program. It's, I think, ranked in the 20 to 30 range, if I'm remembering correctly, depending on the particular publication you're looking at the rankings for. And it has a strong name recognition, at least in the US. And you'll get a great experience. They're pretty strong. So again, it really depends on what experience you want to get, and what tier of school you're searching for. But just as a blanket statement, Foster Business School is great. And Bob G is asking, I am having 12 years experience. Is it right time to do executive MBA? So just in terms of the number of years, yes, an executive MBA makes a lot of sense for you. So now the next question would be, what level are you within your company? Are you kind of an executive level or at least management level? What kinds of experiences have you had? What kind of responsibilities have you had? Those are the sorts of things that will really determine whether or not you're right for an executive MBA. But that's definitely a good number of years. What you want to consider with an executive MBA is they really are looking for people who have managed staffs and have thought on a high level, particularly in terms of strategy for the company, so that when they bring the students together, they can learn from each other and build on each other's experiences. So are you somebody who has accomplished the kinds of things in your career to justify executive MBA versus regular MBA? You wouldn't be too old for a regular MBA if you don't have the executive experience that's required. But you will be a little bit of an outlier, but that doesn't take you out of the running. I had classmates who were 40 years old at SOM. So just consider what executive level experience you've had. And Sarah is asking what the best round to apply for an MBA is. Depends on just how ready you are. I think you want to make sure that you can get every I dotted and every T crossed before you hit submit. So assuming that you can do that no matter what, either round 1 or round 2 would work. Those are both strong application rounds. There's nothing wrong with round 3, but it's just that by the time round 3 deadline, the round 3 deadline hits, they've already sent a lot of their acceptance letters. So you're fighting for very few seats that are left. Round 2 is when most people will be applying, and therefore where most people will get their acceptance letters from. But round 1 is also a great round, especially if it's your dream school. If you know that this is your dream school, you know that this is where you want to go, round 1 helps to demonstrate that and send that signal to the admissions committee. And it might, depending on the school, might be a little bit easier to get in just because they haven't set their average GPA or GMAT scores yet. So you're not being measured against any numbers. You're just being measured against your profile. But that changes school by school. And Sarah, I see you asked a follow-up about if having a CFA as a good compensation for a low GPA. It can be. The caveat to that is just depending on what tier of school you're applying to, particularly a top tier school, there will be a lot of other candidates with a CFA. It helps to mitigate any concerns about your academic abilities, but you will have to find other ways to stand out from other people with a CFA. But I don't think it'll be that many. It's not like the CPA. It depends on what level you are, I think, as to just how strong that is. But short answer is yes, it can help compensate, but also find other ways to mitigate. Prirana is asking, do poor GMAT score work in top 15 to 20 schools? Like you had a 540 where quant was 48 and verbal 17. Should I apply or retake? You have 5 years work experience, 2 promotions, founded a startup on hold. So your work experience is great. That does help to mitigate low scores, but a 540, that's going to be really, really tough. If you look at class profiles, there are sometimes people with a 540 or even lower. Like there's a year that Stanford let somebody in with a 500. So I can't say that there is zero chance, but you're in like that bottom 1 percentile for that tier of school. So it's highly unlikely that you could get in with a 540. You have the time to study and retake, so you absolutely need to do that. The admissions committees, in fact, will wonder why you haven't retaken because you have the time. Now, let's pretend for a second that you go through as many retakes as you can and you're still at the 540 range. You need a stellar GPA. Your work experience does sound pretty good. And you need to do everything else exactly right. And then maybe you'll have like a 1 to 2% chance to get in, which isn't zero, but obviously not strong. But since you have the time, go ahead and retake and maybe even consider taking a prep course. And Kanchan is asking, is 10 years work experience counted as over experience for an MBA application? There's really technically no such thing as over experience. As I mentioned a moment ago, I had classmates who were 40 and therefore would have had not quite 20 years of work experience. So it really just depends on your specific situation, why it is that you think that now's the right time, and how to move forward. But you're definitely still in the running. And Tim said, I've had gap year after my previous job for 2 years now due to COVID, as we had first lockdown for 8 months and second for 4 months. I applied for a few jobs but did not get it. What can I do for MBA? So one thing to keep in mind is we're obviously in an unprecedented time. As cliched as that is to say, it is also true. So admissions committees will understand how COVID has affected people's work situations. What you want to try to do is demonstrate as best you can how you've been productive outside of having a job. Like, are there things you've done to help set yourself up for your short and long-term goals? And have you done some volunteering? Have you done extracurricular activities? Have you picked up other skills? Have you taken courses? Those are the things you want to show as having been done during this gap period. But again, just because of this isn't your normal kind of gap in between jobs. It is such a just a crazy time, for lack of a better word, that I do think admissions committees can understand if there's a little bit lacking in explaining what you've done to be productive in this time. But that is something that you're going to need to explain. And Amjad says, I have B.com with 58%, and MSc Political Science with 73%, and 3 years of experience in development sector and legislative assembly. Am I eligible for top 10 business schools with this profile? So you'd be on the lower end on the GPA, average GPA. And so it's going to rely heavily on your GMAT scores, especially since you only have 3 years of experience. You might consider getting a little more work experience, unless you have if you have a top GMAT, and if you have been promoted once or twice in these 3 years, that can help. That can help mitigate concerns. And it depends on kind of what your particular duties are in legislative assembly, because I'm sure it's going to be a little different depending on exactly where you are serving. But if you can demonstrate quantitative abilities, that'll also help mitigate. But you might consider a little more work experience to help with your GPA. And Bob G said, I am working for Aditya Birla Group as production manager, academic background from chemical engineering. And so this is in follow-up to the previous question about 12 years work experience. So as a production manager, it's really going to depend on what kind of responsibilities you can demonstrate, if you can quantify working with large budgets and quantify accomplishments as a production manager. Have you taken on more responsibility along the years? But just based on what you've mentioned in chat, and that's really all I know at this point, I'm not sure that that's executive MBA. That might be more general MBA. And Swathika said, can I get into top business schools without work experience? So that's an interesting question. Are you in college right now? Because if you are, then you absolutely can get into a top business school without work experience. I mentioned before the Silver Scholars Program for Yale, and I mentioned HBS with their 2+2 program. Stanford also has a program for people who are about to graduate. So work experience is not required if you are in school. The answer, and it looks like you're saying yes, you're in school. So you're definitely eligible for these programs. So you're in good shape there. And Prirana said, what about schools that are offering GMAT waiver this year? Should I apply to those schools while I am preparing for my GMAT retake? Yeah, I mean, you make a good point about because of COVID, there are a lot of GMAT waivers right now. So that does make sense, especially given how stellar your work experience is with the 2 promotions and founding the startup. So I do think that applying to the GMAT waiver schools is helpful. I actually had a client who took advantage of the GMAT waiver and is on the wait list at MIT. And that's, there are a lot of factors that help lead to that. But her stellar work experience helped to overcome the fact that she didn't have a GMAT score. So I think that you definitely fit into that. And Ashi Tadir, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, thanked me for doing the session. You are very welcome. And so I am caught up on questions now, so I'm going to go back to the slideshow, but definitely feel free to ask any more questions. So we just finished talking about why now for the MBA. So one thing you also need to do, and this is across the board, is super important. Not every applicant understands how important it is to conduct deep research into potential schools. And the reason why is a lot of applicants just look at the rankings, and that's all they do in terms of determining where they're going to apply. And that's the wrong approach. So rejections often come from applicants not ensuring that they are a fit with the school. Cultural fit is important. When I was an admissions interviewer at SOM, one of the things I was trained on was being able to determine whether or not the applicant demonstrated a fit with the program and whether or not they would thrive as a result of said fit. And so don't pick schools just because they're highly ranked. Culture, like I said, is really, really important. And will the programs have the proper resources available for you to accomplish your goals? And what that means basically is whatever it is you're trying to do, especially if you're entrepreneurial in nature. is there going to be an incubator to help you with your entrepreneurial aspects? If you're someone who's trying to get into consulting, are they going to have the proper pathway for you to get into whatever field of consulting you want to get into? And did you demonstrate that you will bring something to the program? To be able, in order to be able to demonstrate that, again, you have to know about the school. What makes you unique, particularly against their typical student body, so that you can show how you will contribute to the classroom, to extracurricular activities, to various aspects around the community. So do your research. You should know the schools you apply to inside and out. At Veritas Prep on our website, we have annual reports for most of the top tier schools. There are also blogs and message boards. GMAT Club has some great resources in that regard. And you can also look up student and professional ambassadors for each of these schools. On most websites, if you look at the various extracurricular activities, the different clubs, the presidents or co-presidents or other officers for those clubs will have their email addresses listed. You can absolutely reach out to them, ask for an informational meeting, talk to, like, if there's a club in particular that you're interested in taking part in, or a club that represents one of your career goals. You can talk to the students to get a sense for their experience, how it was helpful to them, what they see as the strengths and weaknesses. That sort of insider information is something that won't be on the school website, though you obviously need to be looking at the school website in addition to these other sources. And there are graduates for these programs who often make themselves available. And while I don't have it listed on the slide, you do want to also see if there are professors you can reach out to. Certain research centers or professors in areas that you want to go into, someone you want to learn from. These folks can help you to also understand the program and what you can get from them, and maybe even what they can get from you. Obviously, in this time of COVID, not all campus visits are as possible as they used to be in the past. But as things start to open back up, you want to try to get on campus and really get a feel for the program. If that's not possible, whether it's COVID or geography reasons, even before COVID, not everyone can make a campus visit, and that's perfectly fine. You have resources online, and there are more and more virtual tours now because of COVID. So take advantage of that so that you can really see what an on-the-ground experience would be for a student. And I'm just looking to see what new questions are here. And so Saranya, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, says, I keep hearing that applying for an MBA in the US isn't a great idea since you only get a year to get an H-1B, unlike STEM courses where you get 3. So you're looking for my take. So unfortunately, just to be candid, I'm not as familiar with the visa process, but I have had many non-US based clients, international based clients, come to US schools with seemingly little issue, little to, if any. So it doesn't seem like the visa situation is any kind of hindrance or deterrent. So I wouldn't rule out an MBA in the US, but I unfortunately just don't have enough of my own personal knowledge to give more detailed of an answer than that. And Ashi Tadir is saying, I'm having a hard time with self-profiling step. Work experience, I have 2.5 years work experience across digital marketing and market research, plus 2 years work experience founding, running a startup, running independently now. A CAD background. I have a bachelor's degree in commerce and a postgraduate diploma in management with a 2.7 GPA in both because of health issues. I have a 720 GMAT. So I think, and so what kind of schools should I be applying to? I think that your work experience looks pretty good. The part I'd want to know a little more about is whether or not you've been promoted in that 2.5 years work experience in digital marketing. But that startup, the fact that it's running independently now, the fact that you were able to found it and get it to a point where it's running independently, I think speaks well for you. Your 720 GMAT is good. That you're obviously right around the median for a top business school for the GMAT. So that, plus the fact that you can explain your GPA because of the health issues, I think can make your top tier schools a reach type school. And we're going to talk about reaches in a little more detail in a couple slides, and maybe apply to your round, your maybe 20 to 50 type schools as well as kind of your on par schools. So we'll touch on that again in a little bit when I get to the slide about reach schools. So I'll give you a more full answer then. Amjad says, whether top B schools have leverage in job market. That is definitely something you want to consider too. So that's what I meant when I said job placement, how important career placement is. So that is one of the things you want to consider when looking at schools. Abhishek says, I do have 12 years of work experience and want to do full-time MBA. Will it be recommended? How are my chances of getting accepted or rejected on the ground of higher year experience? And it's really not a deterrent. To be a little older of a candidate or have more experience isn't in and of itself a reason to be rejected or a negative on your profile. Is really going to come into how can you explain why you want the MBA, and how can you explain why now? That's the crux of what's going to determine whether or not your 12 years work experience makes sense or not. But just on its face, the number of years work experience is not a deterrent in any way, shape, or form. And Rutwick is saying, I've got a 720 GMAT, Quant 48, Verbal 41, from India, 68% GPA. I'm in, looks like engineering graduate with 4 years in policy, 5 promotions and 2 jobs. That's very good. And 1 in infra PE. Dinged at Tuck and Cornell. Goal is infra IB. What else is weak? So my guess is just because you are coming from an overrepresented group of applicants, it was difficult for you to stand out from the crowd. So you want to try to look at some of those things outside of just your stats that can help you to stand out. What's the nature of some of your work experience? I know you said policy and the promotions, but you want to maybe see what about your work experience is different and what can you bring as different from other people from your general profile. And your GPA, particularly given that you're coming from an overrepresented group of applicants in the MBA pool, was probably a deterrent. So you want to see if there are courses you can take, or just maybe even, well, I guess it depends on exactly which courses you did well or not in undergrad. But with that 68% GPA, you're probably going to want to mitigate that with a course in some sort of quantitative program, unless you can show strong quant in your policy work. Off the top of my head, I think those are the areas. So standing out from the crowd and mitigating GPA, particularly quant work. That's probably where the weaknesses were. And you also want to look, different schools have different rules on seeking feedback. So see what Tuck and Cornell's rules are. They may actually be able to give you something specific as to what they saw as weaknesses so that you can address accordingly. And Amjad is saying achievements like drafted bills passed by legislature, published op-ed in newspapers, events, organization, and appreciation certificates help admissions process of low GPA, complemented by reasonable GPA. So this is obviously in reference to the previous question. About BCom. So I think that you have a good work profile, but it's also the kind of work profile where it's going to take a little extra work, particularly in your resume, to explain some of your achievements. So you want to really be able to quantify how these bills that you drafted helped people. I'm not sure what kinds of bills you are drafting, but if you can quantify strengths and achievements, and if any of these are kind of finance-based in any way, that will help, or anything that you can demonstrate your quantitative abilities, that would definitely help. If not, you may need to take a course or two in some harder skills like a finance or accounting course to help mitigate. It'll probably take a little more conversation to be a little more detailed. So I see there are more questions. I am going to just go back to the slideshow and then come back to the questions a little bit later. So we want to talk about finalizing school list. So a lot of people ask, how many schools should you apply to? So I can tell you, I'll start with what typically happens. Candidates typically apply to 5 or 6 schools, but there is no right number. So after researching, you really want to focus on what schools meet your needs that you and what you find intriguing from these needs. I applied to 7 schools myself. And one friend of mine said, "Oh, you're applying to too many. You don't really." But there's no real such thing unless you're just adding schools on the list to be adding schools to the list. Really, you want to be looking at what the right schools are after you've completed all of your research, after you've figured out your career goals. What are these schools that feel right? And if that list happens to be 9 schools, then so be it. As long as you can make sure that you put together a strong application for all of them, that your recommenders can produce letters for all of them. Those are the things to consider also. And so this is what I referenced a couple minutes ago. You want to delineate your choices into tiers. You have reasonable reach schools where acceptance is not likely, but if you put together a great application, the programs are reasonable reaches. And so for the applicant or the questioner I referenced a couple minutes ago, your profile, I think, makes you a reasonable reach for the top schools, even with that 2.7 GPA. But because of the fact that you had health issues that you can explain, and you have a strong GMAT and you have strong work experience, top tier, I think, is a reasonable reach for you. On par schools are the schools where, with a great application, your chances of acceptance are solid as your profile matches the class profile that they show online on their website. And then safety schools obviously are the ones where you will likely be admitted if you soundly present your case in the application. So there's no such thing as a guarantee, Even if a school is a safety school for you, it's not 100% that you're going to get in. And if you have a super strong profile, then you'll notice, if you haven't applied to business school before, you'll notice that MBA programs will ask what other schools you're applying to. They ask that question for a couple of reasons. One is it helps them to really determine fit. And if you did your research and you are applying to the right schools, then the list of schools that you're applying to will make sense to the admissions committee. So it's another way to demonstrate that you are a good fit. But the other thing they do is, if you are in fact a safety, applying to a safety school, if I pretend for a second that I'm the admissions committee member for a safety school, and I'm looking at your profile and it looks like you're a slam dunk for HBS or Stanford, which you have on your list, and I'm some lower tiered school, I might reject you just because I know you're not going to come to me. I know you're going to be accepted by at least one of these top schools on your list. And I want to preserve my yield. So yield means out of all of the people that this school sent acceptance letters to, X percentage said yes and actually came to my school. So that's the yield. And yield is one of the things that helps to measure the rankings. And that doesn't mean don't apply to a safety school, because you do need to have, most applicants need to have a safety school. But that's a reason why it's not a 100% guarantee that you'll be accepted to a safety school, just because they think you're not going to come. But you will likely be admitted to your safety school. And I want to explain subjectivity and applications. And I touched on it a moment ago about how you could even be rejected from a safety school. You can be accepted to Harvard and rejected from a ranked number 75 school. So it really is a numbers game. And there will be more qualified cultural fits than there are seats. And so as a result, some decisions end up being random. So make sure you've differentiated yourself if you're a part of a very well-represented group, like McKinsey consultants, Indian IT males, and so on. And so that's what I was touching on a few minutes ago when talking about the profile of the one person in comments, that I think the reason why Tuck and Cornell might have dinged you is because you didn't necessarily differentiate yourself. Plus you had that lower GPA. And so you also want to look at how much studying will be required to get the test score you need. How much time will it take for you to reach a competitive level of leadership in your organization? Do you need to take any coursework to mitigate a low GPA or gain skills you cannot get from your job? So we talked about that a little bit, but that is one course of action that people can take, whether it is to take MBA math, if it looks like your quant experiences and exposure are a little on the low side, or you can take a course in economics, accounting, finance, something along those lines. Anything like that to help bolster your profile. And do you need to add any extracurricular activities? Because a lot of these programs, especially your top tier programs, they care that you have been fully immersed in your community and that you've been active. So that often takes the form of extracurricular activities. And you want to consider expanding the school list beyond one or two dream schools. So that goes back to what I said before about how many schools is the right number to apply to. While there's technically no real right answer, I would encourage you to not just whittle the list to one or two, unless you are so certain that the experience you want to get can only be acquired at these one or two schools, and you'd be fine without an MBA if you can't get into one of those one or two schools. But otherwise, you'd want to expand the list beyond just such a small number. And so I'll leave this slide up while I go back to answering questions, but I do want to remind you that Veritas Prep we have free admissions phone consultations, and that's actually pinned at the top. So I'll end on this slide, and I'll go back to answering questions. And so Ashid Tadir, you are very welcome. And Archita Singh, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but you said you have 3 years of work experience by the July 2022 before batch starts, 7.35 GPA. GMAT is due in August. You're an architect who moved up to managerial role in startup. Will have a good chance of experience. So the fact that you were able to move up to a managerial role, even in just 3 years, 3 years by a year from now. So that means you have another extra year to potentially get even more experience or another promotion in the 3 years. So I think that is good. Your 7.35 GPA, is that out of a 10 GPA? That would be my question, because U.S. schools are out of a 4.0 scale. So it depends on what the scale is for your GPA as to how strong that would be viewed. But I think that your architect, the fact that you're an architect is going to help you stand out. The fact that you're a woman is going to help you stand out, and you have good work experience. So you have a good chance. So it's just going to really get into more of the details of the quality of your work experience beyond your promotion, what kinds of things you've done, and again, exactly what that GPA rests on based on the scale. And Ashi Tadir is asking a follow-up about retaking the GMAT and pulling up the score. So it could have an impact. You mentioned in the previous question you had a 720 GMAT, and you didn't have promotions, but different companies. But I still think your work experience is good. But it depends on how much you can pull your GMAT up by. If it's a couple points, or like 5 points, I don't think that's a lot of impact. But if you can pull up your GMAT by a lot, then obviously that will have a strong impact. So you really want to consider just how much higher you think you can pull your score up. And I see that Archita said that's out of 10, that's 7.35. So that's a lower, I would think that's a lower GPA then. So you may need to find some other ways to help mitigate that GPA. So you're going to need a really strong GMAT or GRE or EA, which I know you said you're going to take the GMAT. And depending on what GMAT score you get, you may consider taking a course along the lines of what I mentioned a few moments ago. Anisha said, I have 6.5 years of experience and have a master's degree with a 3.0 GPA, 3.5 GPA in my undergrad, currently working as industrial engineer. I am shooting for a 720 GMAT. Will I get in one of the top 10? So it's going to depend in part on the nature of your 6.5 years work experience. But your 3.5 undergraduate GPA is strong. The fact that your more recent GPA is lower could be a concern unless it was a pretty rigorous program, especially if you were working at the same time. So it really depends on some of the specifics about your master's degree and why it was a 3.0 as opposed to the 3.5 like your undergrad, and then what kind of work you're doing. You're at least in the conversation based on what you've shared with me so far for top 10 school. But how strong it is will depend on more details. Lambo Walker says, hoping one day will come when I'll be watching these videos instead of GMAT strategies. Nice. Sarah has a follow-up question. Is it important to convert our grades to GPA scale? Do schools accept transcripts with different grade scales, such as out of 20? Is having a 13 or 14 out of 20 still considered a good GPA? So each school is going to have its own rules about what to do with GPA. So make sure you study those school rules. But in general, they tell you, at least the top schools tell you not to convert the GPAs. So follow that. The admissions committees themselves will do their own conversions. And in terms of whether a 13 or 14 out of 20 is still considered a good GPA, really depends on what tier of school you're applying to. And I should have pointed that out for Anisha as well. So Anisha was talking specifically about top 10 schools. So that's where the 3.0 GPA was a little bit of a concern for me. And for Archita, the 7.35 GPA, it depends on what tier of school for Archita and for Sarah. For your top 10 schools, that's on the lower side. As you start going down in tiers, that ends up not being too low. So it's one of the things you want to look at when you're looking at the schools is their middle 80% for GPA and GMAT. And that'll give you kind of a good sense for where you're landing in there. But the median for a lot of your top 10 schools will be, if you're looking at a 4.0 scale, like right around a 3.5. And the lower part of the middle 80% will be about a 3.2, 3.25. But again, as you get into lower tier schools, those middle 80% and medians come down. But that'll kind of give you a little idea as to where you fall in line accordingly. And Sarah, you are welcome. Vivek says, I am an electronics engineer with 8.59 C GPA, working with Siemens as technical project lead and have 4 years of experience. I want to pursue my career in product management. Which B schools shall I target? So you want to pursue product management and you come from an engineering background. So I guess I'd want to know a little bit more about your product management interest to be able to really throw out schools. But based on your GPA and just the general idea of product management, I think something like a Kellogg could work for you, or even a maybe a Sloan, MIT Sloan, like that kind of school. But it would take a little more research and a little more understanding of your exact desires to really figure out what the right schools to target are. And Tim says, will preparing for GMAT exam count as being productive for the gap year? So obviously anybody with a gap year right now is preparing for the GMAT. I would look for any extracurricular activities you've done, any extra skills that you've picked up, any extra courses. Because in theory, if you were still employed, you would still be preparing for the GMAT. So you want to look for those things. What have you been doing with your time? Obviously, you've been looking for jobs. That's a big part of what you've been doing with your time. But you theoretically had extra time outside of studying for the GMAT and outside of looking for the other job. So what have you done with that extra time to be productive? Dhruv said for MIM programs, deferred MBA, early entry options. What should we aim for apart from academics and extracurriculars in college? Is a good GMAT score sufficient for a strong application? So those, I mean, if you have a good GMAT, if you have strong extracurriculars and academics, obviously all of that's great, but you don't want to just focus on extracurricular activities when you were in college. You also want to look at extracurricular activities you have now post-college. Like, what are you doing in the community as a full-time employee? And what kind of experience are you getting in your job? That will also help. And so you don't want to think of it as too one-dimensional, particularly with extracurriculars. And you will need to make sure that you can help yourself stand out and demonstrate a school fit. All of that is the stuff that comes together to be sufficient for a strong application. Arjev said 3 years work experience, 760 GMAT, 3.1 GPA. Which B schools can I target? So sky's the limit for you. Your GPA is a little on the lower side compared to your top schools, but your GMAT is on the high side. So that kind of balances out. 3 years work experience. It's really going to depend on the nature, the quality of that work experience. Have you been promoted? What kinds of things are you doing? What industry are you in? So those, depending on what answers you have to those questions, that may temper my excitement a little bit. But I do think just looking at the numbers, that can be, you can still be eligible for top 10. And Archita says, thank you. You are welcome. Viam says GMAT 700. C GPA of 8.1 out of 10. 6 years work experience in business development and sales, leading a team of 8 people, targeting Tepper, McCombs, UCLA, Marshall, Foster, McDonough. That's a reasonable list for your GMAT and GPA and work experience. So again, you want to really, when you put together your resume and your overall profile, you're going to want to make sure that you are showing a good quality of work experience beyond just the number of years and the area. But the fact that you've been a manager is helpful. And the fact that it's business development and sales is also going to be helpful because it's theoretically quantitative. So I think that's all good stuff. Yeah, so I think just make sure what the current class profile says in terms of middle 80% on GMAT and GPA. I think you're middle 80% for all of these schools, but you may just need to add, I would say that the schools you listed are probably on par schools, so you may just add a safety school or two to your list. Arpit says Indian male, 730 GMAT, engineer from IIT, GPA 7.25 out of 10, 5 years of experience, currently working in private equity. All right, so as I mentioned before, Indian male with engineer background, that is an overrepresented group. So even though you have a strong GMAT, you may need to try to bring it up just a little bit. Because of the group that you're coming from. Private equity is interesting. That helps to make you stand out a little more from your typical Indian male IT person. But you're going to, so if we just look at numbers, you're a strong candidate. But you're going to need to find a way to make yourself stand out. So what are some of the things outside of engineer and private equity and your scores that help to make you look like a different candidate, particularly some of your extracurriculars? That's an opportunity to stand out. Mr. Kukredi says 6 out of 10 GPA, 3 years work experience, network administrator, 740 GMAT. So I like that 740 GMAT. GPA's on the low side. So 3 years work experience and 740 GMAT may not be enough to mitigate the GPA. Maybe. Really depends on the quality of your work experience. As I keep hitting on, that's going to be a common theme, I think. So what kinds of things went into your 3 years work experience as a network administrator? Were you promoted? Oh, I see you added later. 770 GMAT. And best options if I want to pursue marketing strategy oriented role. So with your updated, so I was reading your first comment and I see your second one now. So given that you say 770 GMAT, I think that mitigates the concerns I had just a moment ago. But again, you want to look at what the quality of your 3 years work experience is. Were you promoted? What kinds of responsibilities do you have? Do you manage any staff? Those sorts of things will help. But best options if you want to pursue marketing or strategy-oriented roles, I think Kellogg could be a strong program for you. So I would start looking at Kellogg. If you like the culture there, then start looking for similar type schools, maybe a Berkeley, Haas, maybe a Michigan Ross, those sorts of schools, and see if you think those are a fit, and then kind of broaden from there. Let's see here. Ajit Kumar, sorry for butchering your name. Ajit Kumar, 7.1 years, sales support engineer at Honeywell, plus 3 years on your own startup, undergraduate GPA, 7.6 out of 9. So that's a 70.8 for PG GPA. Curator, World Economic Forum, NGOs for 10 years, 1 national award, 3 professional awards. Goal, strategic marketing role in non-IT firm. So you might actually consider executive MBAs as well as full-time MBAs based on your profile. So I do think marketing role in non-IT firm. I really like your overall profile because it's the World Economic Forum in particular, and the NGOs, I think help you to stand out. I think SOM would be a great place to look for you, and so would Kellogg, so would Tuck. If you like schools like that, then kind of broaden your search from those similar type schools. And Arjav said technical team lead of 8, spearheaded the team size growth from 3 to 8, subject matter expert, want to become a strategy consultant. Which schools you suggested I go for given these goals, and would Stern be a good option? Stern would be a good option. I think so would SOM. I keep mentioning Kellogg. Kellogg would be a good place to look at. Michigan Ross would be good with your profile. R. Pete says, thank you for the excellent feedback. I am targeting top 13, 14 in the US. I feel I have done some good stuff outside of work, but I'm unable to bring my GPA up, obviously, because GPA, once you're out of school, that is done. So as I mentioned before, I like the private equity because it helps to make you stand out a little more. I do think you have good chances just on, I think that top 13, top 14 are strong candidates for reasonable reach. And then kind of look for maybe that 20 to 40 tier school as well as on par type schools. And again, just make sure you can find a way to help yourself stand out. Lakshmi says, I just plan to do an MBA. I'm just completed my bachelor degree. Don't have any work experience. Can I get into a top business school? So when you say you just completed your bachelor degree, I assume you mean just 2 months ago or so, or within the past couple of months. You'd have to look this up to be sure, but I don't think you'd be eligible for Silver Scholars at SOM or the HBS 2+2 or the Stanford program, because you'd have to still be a college senior to apply to those programs. So because of that, that would mean, if I'm right about the deadlines, so double check me on that. But if I'm right about that, that means you are going to need to either A, get some work experience, or B, get another, apply for another graduate degree. But I would probably go and get the work experience. Get something in the field that you think you want to be in long term. Get a couple years minimum of experience in that, and then go apply to business school. And Mr. Kukretti said, thank you. You are very welcome. Ajit Kumar says, looking for full-time MBA. So I'd think your profile works for that too. Saranya says 8 years of experience in data science and analytics, decent brands. Abin Bev, Mu Sigma, 8.9 out of 10 in undergrad. Decent career trajectory and experience leading teams, expecting a 740 in GMAT. Where should I apply? I think you can look at top tier schools. Post-MBA goal, consulting. So top tier, so consulting, I would say SOM, I would say Kellogg, I would say Ross, maybe Haas. Depends on the culture of the school. I'm just kind of throwing out names of schools that are strong in these fields, but you'll have to do your own research to see if the culture is a fit for you. But I do think these are good places to start. I haven't mentioned Chicago. I haven't mentioned Booth yet, but they're strong in this area too. It's a different kind of culture than SOM and Kellogg. So again, you want to see which one is the right fit for you in terms of that. San Scruti, again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering names, but I have the same query. MBA in the US isn't a good option because of the visa. Students have had to come back their postgrad because they couldn't get an extension. So I guess it depends on which U.S. school you went to as to whether or not going to a U.S. school is beneficial. If you're looking to stay in the U.S. and the visa is an issue, then I think that's different. But a lot of these top tier U.S.-based schools, like your top 10, top 20 U.S. schools, do have global brands. So even if you're not able to stay in the U.S. after you've graduated from the MBA program, those brands and their global reach and their career placement resources can still help you in other countries get jobs. So you do want to consider that. I wouldn't close out a U.S.-based school just because you won't necessarily be able to stay in the U.S. with a U.S.-based job after you're done. But if that is of concern, then obviously you want to look at focus more on your international-based schools, and every country has schools that are just as good as any of the U.S. schools that we've been talking about. So it depends on what region you want to stick with. Do you want to be in Europe, Asia, India? You have a lot of fantastic resources and opportunities in each of those areas. Grave Walker says 6 years total experience in Fortune 10 company, targeting 730 GMAT, dual degree math and mechanical engineering from a tier 1 school. Was an expatriate for 3 years in global position. no direct management experience, and worked with senior management quite a lot. Any suggestions? In 7.35 GPA. So I think your tier 1 schools, your top 10 programs, top 20 programs, I think those are within reach for you. The GPA, it's a little bit lower, but your GMAT and work experience, I think, will mitigate that. And I think you can definitely look at your top tier schools as kind of a mix of reasonable reach and on par. Maybe look at your top 20 to 50 schools as a mix of on par and safety. And our Jav says, thank you. We'll explore those programs a bit further. Only thing I am scared of is the number of years of work experience that I have, i.e. 3.6 years by July 2022. The average work experience for these schools is 5+. So, as I mentioned before, while that is the average, one thing you want to keep in mind is that for any stat that we're talking about, for a particular number to be the average or the median, you've had half of the applicants come in higher and the other half come in lower. So 3.6 years is still well within reach given your profile. So I think you are still in good shape. Tejasvini, again, sorry if I'm butchering your name. Indian female, 680 GMAT, 7.1 out of 10 GPA in engineering, 3.5 years of marketing consulting experience with more than 15 Fortune 500 companies across the globe. Want to pursue MBA in marketing in Singapore. So I'll talk US-based schools for a second. If we're talking US-based schools, I think the fact that you are a woman in engineering with marketing consulting experience and 15 Fortune 500 companies across the globe, I think all of that can make, I think all of that is strong stuff. It can mitigate your GMAT and GPA a little bit, but your profile is probably looking at like a top 20, top 50 school if we're talking US. Depending on which school you're talking about, they may or may not have a reach in Singapore. Now, I do think if you can bring your GMAT up, then you can open the door for the top tier, like the top 20 schools being a reasonable reach. Exactly which top tier school depends on, the more specifics of your profile. But then you also have global programs. Non-US based schools don't have the same focus on GMAT scores that US based schools do. So there are a lot of fantastic programs in Europe and Asia that will have a reach in Singapore that can open the door for you with the 680 GMAT. So you'll also want to keep that in mind. So it's just a question as to where you want to live and where you want to get your MBA experience from. Hope that's helpful. Shubham says more than 6 years of experience in a State Bank of India as credit analyst for SME Advance. GPA in engineering is 6.5. So that's going to depend on your GMAT and the nature of your work as credit analyst, what kinds of achievements you've had, have you been promoted, as to where you can target, whether or not it mitigates your GPA. So that's not quite enough information to know exactly where to target. Archita says, I'm targeting top 25 schools, mainly in Europe, along with my profile. What should be the minimal GMAT score for my profile? And further addition, involved in family business, active social worker, and freelance photographer, field of interest in marketing and entrepreneurship. All right. So all of that is great. As I mentioned a moment ago, the European-based countries, the MBA programs there don't have the same focus on GMAT. I don't really have a minimum to throw at you, but I think if you're able to get 650 or above, you'd be in contention for the top European schools. If you get a 700 or above, then you'd be in strong contention in the U.S. Sarah, Moroccan female, studied in both Morocco and France, math and CS, computer science, I assume. GPA 13 out of 14, or 13 or 14 out of 20, sorry. 2 years experience in finance, IT, capital markets, and I am aiming for a 720 plus in GMAT, chances in top 10 and London Business School. So the 2 years experience, I'd want to know a little bit more about that. Have you been promoted? What exactly are you doing in finance, IT, capital markets? So the fact that you don't have a lot of work experience is going to have to be strong quality. But just based on the numbers, I think for London Business School and top 10 US, that GPA is a little on the lower side. So you'd really have to maybe bring that GMAT higher than 720 and make sure that your work experience is really stellar. If you can't get more than 720 in GMAT, then it really rests on your work experience, the quality of the 2 years, and you may consider just getting 1 or 2 more years of work experience. Sarah says, what can I do to improve GPA? Well, you can't really improve GPA, unfortunately, but you can mitigate it with a GMAT score or work experience or coursework that we've talked about before. How does CMU compare to Ross and Tuck? Carnegie Mellon is a great program, Saranya. So it's really just about fit. It's a different kind of culture than Ross and Tuck. They're similar statures. It's just a different feeling program. So that's where your research is going to come into play. And I know there are some more questions, but it looks like they are mostly variations on the same themes that we've talked about. So I guess I would sum it up this way, because a lot of you are really just giving me your stats and then saying, what school should I apply to? Tim just popped up with which top 20 schools are friendly towards older applicants. Was supposed to apply in 2019 as a 32-year-old, but COVID came, international applicant, but American, looking MBA fall 2022, at least a 700 GMAT. So SOM, like I said, I had classmates who were 40. And you are in the tech VC space, worked in marketing, business development for 8 years. There's not really a top 20 program that's not friendly towards older applicants. So I wouldn't, I don't really think there's a school that you need to target more than another. I think it's really just based on the same kind of concepts we've been talking about, where you see a fit culturally, particularly based on the fact that you're in the tech VC space and worked in marketing and business development, aiming for that 700 GMAT. I think for you, looking to work in the tech VC space, so you might look at like Haas, you might look at Chicago Booth. Those are different cultures, but both would be strong in that space, and then kind of expand from there based on which of those 2 schools you think fit your cultural fit. And Saranya, you are very welcome. I'm glad this was helpful and useful. But for a lot of the rest of you who are asking specifics about stats, you're telling me your GMAT score and your GPA and your work experience. Really looking at those middle 80% on the schools, that's going to help you. And as you've heard me answering other people's questions, I think that kind of gives you an idea of the kinds of things I'm looking at to help people determine whether or not they should be looking at top tier or lower tier. But really just look at the class profiles on some of these schools and do research based on what area you want to go into post MBA. Do different searches for what the best schools are for, tech or for finance or for whatever, and compare yourself to those fields. I think that is the better way to look at that, rather than me trying to answer everybody individually about your specific stats. Oh, and Arpete is editing earlier. So targeting top 13, 14 schools have been unable to bring GMAT up. How do you see my chances at Tuck, NYU, Yale, Duke, and CBS? So Arpete, since we talked earlier, I will follow up on your question. And so, I think based on what you shared before, I think, like I mentioned to you before, because you're Indian male with an engineering background, have been unable to bring GMAT up, I do think that top tier schools, the schools that you listed, are reasonable reaches. But, you're just going to have to make yourself stand out and maybe pick some on par, some lower tiered schools as on par and safety. But I hope I've answered everyone's questions. Again, when you're, oh, I just realized that my last slide had the wrong title. So I apologize for that. But I hope that answers everyone's questions. Again, really consider, just to wrap up and sum up, really consider your career goals. Consider the schools, do a search for the schools that are great for those goals, compare yourself to those class profiles, and really study to see where you have the school fit. So thank you for your time. I've enjoyed it. Hope that you have also, and I hope this was helpful. Have a great rest of your day.